Humanity entered the Galactic Council with the kind of optimism only a young species could still afford. They weren't naive, they knew the galaxy was dangerous. But they believed diplomacy mattered, believed treaties meant something, believed neutrality would protect them. For a while it did. Their ships carried aid, not weapons. Their colonies built research labs, not fortresses. And for most species, humans were simply newcomers trying to find their place among thousands of older civilizations. But to the Threx Dominion, a militaristic empire convinced of its own superiority, humans were an opportunity. They saw a species unwilling to posture or threaten. They saw restraint and assumed it was weakness. They saw humanity's compassion and labeled it cowardice. And once they convinced themselves humans couldn't fight back, the decision to exploit them became easy. It began with the destruction of a humanitarian convoy, unarmed freighters carrying medical supplies to an independent world recovering from a plague. The Threx called it a border error, blaming the humans for entering a restricted zone. But survivors' escape pods told a different story. Threx warships had surrounded the convoy, scanned it, confirmed its civilian status, and fired anyway. The footage spread across human space within hours. The shock that followed wasn't loud, it was cold, focused, and eerily unified. Yet even then, humanity didn't lash out. They requested an inquiry, demanded sanctions, asked the Galactic Council to intervene. The Council responded with silence first, then excuses. Insufficient evidence. Delicate political climate. The Dominion is cooperating. The message was clear, justice would be inconvenient. Then came the outpost attack. A science station orbiting a gas giant, staffed by researchers working on atmosphere-reading drones. No military value. No strategic importance. The Threx hit it anyway, annihilating the station so quickly that the human colony beneath saw only a bright streak across the sky as debris burned up in the atmosphere. This time, the Dominion didn't bother fabricating excuses. Their ambassador sneered publicly, claiming humans had stumbled into the consequences of galactic affairs beyond their comprehension. It wasn't just aggression, it was humiliation, a deliberate attempt to provoke surrender without ever calling it that. But humans didn't bend. They gathered evidence, compiled witness accounts, pushed for accountability. The Dominion responded by leaking classified communications to portray humans as unstable warmongers. It was a tactic they'd used on weaker species countless times. What the Threx didn't understand was that humanity's patience wasn't infinite. It was measured, controlled, and dangerously deep. Their restraint wasn't submission, it was discipline forged from millennia of surviving their own worst impulses. But when that restraint finally broke, it did so not with chaos, but with clarity. The final trigger wasn't an attack on ships or infrastructure, it was the massacre on Tathra Ridge. A colony of engineers and their families, nearly 8,000 people, vanished when Threx ground forces swept across the settlement, leaving only scorched foundations behind. The Dominion dismissed it as a counterterrorism operation. They didn't even bother denying they did it. The effect across human space was instantaneous. For the first time since joining the interstellar community, every government, every colony, every institution aligned with a single voice. There was no debate. No hesitation. The United Terran Defense Council was formed within hours. Shipyards that had been producing exploration vessels shifted to war production without waiting for orders. Mining colonies began redirecting resources before Earth even issued the directive. The message that spread through humanity wasn't about revenge, it was about survival. The Dominion had shown they would escalate until humanity no longer existed. When the declaration of war was broadcast, there was no triumph in it. No threats. No bravado. Just a simple statement read by a human representative whose voice didn't shake. We did not choose this conflict. You forced our hand. And we will not fall. Across the galaxy, species who had once ignored humanity felt a ripple of unease. They'd seen humans under pressure before, during disasters, famines, plagues, and noticed how quickly they adapted, how fiercely they protected one another. But no one had ever seen them unified against an external enemy. No one had ever seen what happened when humanity set aside hope for peace and prepared instead for war. The Dominion had wanted a compliant, breakable species. What they created instead was a focused, determined civilization ready to defend itself with everything it had. And for the first time, faint traces of concern appeared even within the Dominion's ruling chamber. Because the humans weren't trembling. They weren't pleading. They were preparing. Humanity's shift from diplomacy to war didn't unfold gradually, it detonated. One moment they were pleading for investigations and restraint, and the next the entire species moved with a precision that startled even their closest allies. Every major power on Earth, from governments to private megacorporations, synchronized their assets without a single dispute. It wasn't unity forced by fear. It was unity born from a shared understanding that survival now depended on abandoning hesitation entirely. Within hours, the United Terran Defense Council issued the mobilization directive. Within minutes, millions were acting on it. Shipyards that once built exploration cruisers reconfigured themselves into heavily armed production lines. The lunar docking rings repurposed their circular structures into mass assembly platforms capable of churning out destroyers at a pace no alien engineer would have considered realistic. Even the independent colonies, often slow to coordinate with Earth, fell instantly in line, turning mining outposts into material hubs and redirecting entire asteroid processing arrays toward armor plating and fuel synthesis. Everything operated around the clock, not because orders demanded it, but because humanity's instinctive resilience kicked in. They'd survived catastrophes before. They knew how to rebuild under pressure. Now they applied that same grit to preparing for a war they refused to lose. Military strategists moved just as quickly. The Council brought together minds who had never met but had spent their lives studying conflict from wildly different angles: historians, commanders, simulation theorists, quantum engineers, counterinsurgency specialists, even game designers whose predictive models proved bizarrely accurate in asymmetric warfare. Instead of arguing philosophies, they fused them. Humanity didn't try to mimic alien doctrines, they reinvented their approach entirely. They analyzed the Threx's rigid command structure, their predictable formation patterns, their reliance on overwhelming force, and saw opportunities instead of threats. The first strategic doctrine produced by the Council didn't emphasize matching the Dominion's strength, it emphasized exploiting its arrogance. While alien militaries traditionally value cautious expansion and long-term logistics, humans treated the war like a rapidly evolving problem. They created modular command algorithms capable of rewriting tactics mid-battle. They designed ships with adaptable loadouts that could be reconfigured between engagements. They even integrated civilian tech, turning outdated satellites, deep-sea drones, and construction bots into tools for reconnaissance and electronic disruption. No idea was dismissed for being unconventional. If it could work, it was tested. If it worked once, it was scaled. The psychological shift among the population was equally dramatic. The fear that had followed the early attacks transformed into something sharper. People volunteered not because of propaganda, but because the Dominion had made the mistake of targeting civilians. Families who had lost everything stepped forward with an intensity that alien analysts misinterpreted as desperation. They didn't understand that when humans grieve, they don't surrender, they become unyielding. That emotional force translated into staggering enlistment numbers across every colony. Training centers overflowed. Veterans returned to service without being asked. Civilians learned first aid, evacuation protocols, and survival strategies as if preparing for a natural disaster. Humanity had always been good at enduring storms. Now they prepared to become one. The early defensive skirmishes revealed something the Dominion had not anticipated. Human crews adapted mid-battle in ways their enemies couldn't track. When engines failed, humans rerouted power manually rather than waiting for automated systems. When weapons malfunctioned, engineers improvised replacements from raw materials. Even small patrol ships displayed a level of improvisational tenacity that baffled Dominion tacticians. Losses happened, but they weren't clean victories for the enemy. Every destroyed human vessel left damage behind: scarred warships, shattered escorts, communications interference created by human tactical jammers. The Dominion expected the humans to crumble under pressure. Instead, every encounter made them sharper. As reports of human resistance spread, some minor species watched with growing interest. They knew the Dominion crushed rebellions effortlessly, but this time the Empire wasn't facing another subjugated world. It was facing a problem it had never encountered, an enemy that fought unpredictably, creatively, and with a unified purpose that bordered on frightening. The Dominion maintained its smugness publicly, but its officers started requesting reinforcements they'd never needed before. They whispered concerns about human adaptability, human stubbornness, and human willingness to absorb losses without fracturing. What none of them realized yet was that humanity had only begun preparing. Their shipyards were still ramping up. Their new weapons were still being tested. Their strategies were still evolving. The Threx believed the humans were barely holding on. But humans weren't scrambling for survival anymore, they were building momentum. And momentum, once humanity seized it, didn't slow down. Human intelligence teams dissected every fragment of Dominion data they could intercept, searching for patterns the Threx assumed were unbreakable. Their empire operated with the confidence of a species that had never been seriously challenged, a rigid hierarchy, centralized command ships, and predictable reinforcement schedules. To them, it was efficiency. To humanity, it was a map covered in weak points. The Council's analysts realized that if they struck the Dominion's logistical arteries instead of its frontline fleets, the entire war machine would stumble. It wasn't about overpowering the Threx, it was about destabilizing them faster than they could react. The first counterstrike began with silence. Human stealth corvettes, built from experimental alloys that absorbed incoming scans, slipped through Dominion border space unnoticed. No bright engines. No communication bursts. Just drifting shadows carried by gravitational currents until they reached the Dominion's supply relays. Those relays had been designed under the assumption that no enemy would be reckless enough to attack deep logistics. The Threx believed their size alone made such a strike unthinkable. They didn't consider that humans saw unthinkable as an invitation. When the first relay went dark, Dominion commanders assumed it was a malfunction. When the second followed minutes later, they suspected sabotage from within. When the third vanished entirely, panic began to creep through the ranks. None of them imagined an enemy would bypass their defensive lines and strike the spine of their empire. They didn't yet know that humanity had developed new weapons engineered specifically for this purpose. Kinetic slugs accelerated to velocities that required no explosives. The projectiles didn't create fireballs or leave dramatic signatures. They simply punched through structures with such force that stations split silently before alarms could sound. Once the supply network began collapsing, human fleets launched the next phase. Their target wasn't territory. It was the Dominion command chain. Dominion admirals expected battle formations to clash in symmetrical fields. Instead, humans swarmed from unexpected directions, breaking formations apart before they fully assembled. The Battle of the Caros Line became the moment the galaxy realized humanity fought differently. Threx warships waited in standard blockade positions, expecting frontal assaults. Humans didn't bother. They hit the flanks with corvettes too small to register as threats, then used destroyers to carve paths straight toward the command ships. It wasn't strategy by brute force. It was strategy built on psychological disruption. The Dominion's communications grid lit up with distress calls as their command vessels fell one after another. Confused officers struggled to understand why humans ignored their heavily armed carriers, choosing instead to dismantle the fleet's leadership. Dominion military doctrine assumed no enemy would dare target command corps directly. It was dishonorable, reckless, and destabilizing. They had no context for a species that viewed war as a problem to solve, not a ritual to honor. During the chaos, humanity deployed another unconventional tactic. They broadcast the identities of the murdered civilians from the early attacks, transmitting their faces, ages, and last recorded messages across open channels. Dominion officers, accustomed to dehumanizing their enemies, suddenly found themselves confronted with the people they had dismissed as insignificant. Some hesitated. Some faltered. And the hesitation spread faster than any virus. Human losses were real, but their momentum overwhelmed the Dominion's structure. Every destroyed Threx ship carried a message home: humanity wasn't fighting a defensive war anymore. They were dismantling the Dominion piece by piece. The tipping point came when the Dominion flagship attempted to retreat. Humans didn't let it. A coordinated strike from 3 human cruisers disabled its jump systems, and boarding teams forced their way inside to seize the central intelligence core. That victory sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The flagship's destruction was recorded by dozens of neutral outposts, and each recording showed the same thing: human determination overpowering an empire that had never considered the possibility. After the battle, the galaxy's perception shifted overnight. Humanity, once dismissed as inexperienced newcomers, became a force no analyst could easily categorize. They fought with precision, creativity, and ferocity, but also with purpose. They didn't burn planets or slaughter civilians. They struck where it mattered most. Inside the Dominion, fear began to spread. Officers whispered that the humans fought like a species with nothing left to lose, but the truth was far worse. Humanity wasn't desperate. Humanity was just getting started. Humanity's victories at the Caro's line didn't tempt them into overconfidence. They treated every gain as a stepping stone, not a triumph. The Council immediately ordered the recovery of every usable scrap from destroyed Dominion vessels. Wreckage was hauled into lunar dry docks, and teams of scientists tore through alien systems with the urgency of people who knew each discovery could save thousands. Dominion tech was advanced, but it was also rigid. Every component had a single purpose, every system a predetermined function. Humanity didn't see constraints, they saw building blocks. They studied shield generators, tore apart plasma conduits, and deciphered Dominion encryption so quickly that even allied species whispered uneasily. Humans weren't just catching up, they were accelerating. Mars laboratories led the next leap. Their engineers bypassed Dominion design philosophy entirely, using captured energy cores to amplify human rail technology, creating weapons that fired projectiles capable of crippling cruisers in a single strike. Deep space fabrication rings prototyped modular ship armor that shifted composition mid-battle, responding to heat signatures and concentrated fire. Old satellites were refitted into quantum-linked relays, creating communication networks impossible for the Dominion to jam. Humanity's strength wasn't in matching alien innovation, it was in reimagining it. As tech surged forward, so did strategy. Human tactical AIs, trained on countless simulations, began coordinating strike groups with unnerving precision. Entire fleets moved like single organisms, adapting their formations in milliseconds. Dominion analysts who intercepted human data streams misinterpreted them as chaotic noise. They couldn't understand systems that didn't follow the linear logic they were accustomed to. Human unpredictability, once dismissed as incompetence, became a weapon sharper than any railgun. This rapid evolution did not go unnoticed. Smaller species that had long lived under Dominion pressure began sending quiet envoys to human space. They offered intelligence, trade, and in some cases, volunteers. Humanity accepted them without demanding tribute or loyalty. This shocked the galaxy more than any battlefield victory. For generations, power blocks had treated lesser species as bargaining chips. Humanity treated them as partners. The Council broadcast open commitments promising liberation rather than conquest. It was the first time in centuries that oppressed worlds saw a chance at genuine change. Meanwhile, the Dominion struggled to understand how the war had slipped out of their control. Every attempt to regroup was interrupted by human interference. Stealth teams infiltrated high-value facilities, sabotaging reactors and supply depots. Colonies long assumed to be loyal to the Dominion began rising up after receiving covert human support. Research hubs reported system breaches that couldn't be traced. Rumors spread among Dominion troops, stories of human operatives appearing inside supposedly secure zones, bypassing security protocols that had stood unbroken for decades. Morale cracked. Superstitions grew. Soldiers whispered that humans could sense fear, that they fought with a relentlessness unseen in the galaxy's modern era. On the front lines, human fleets began pushing deeper into Dominion territory. They no longer fought defensive skirmishes or targeted border strongholds. They struck at nodes that held the Empire together. Hyperlane control stations, tactical AI clusters, fuel vaults buried beneath asteroid citadels. Nothing was unreachable. Each strike was a message that the Dominion's vastness could no longer protect it. Even when the Dominion deployed elite legions, humanity countered with strategies that shattered old doctrines. They used false retreat maneuvers, adaptive stealth fields, and decoy fleets built from automated drones. Dominion admirals found themselves fighting ghosts, unable to distinguish real threats from human misdirection. The galaxy's perception of the war transformed. What had begun as an expected conquest became a spectacle of human ingenuity. Species that once mocked humanity's youth now watched with a mixture of awe and dread. They saw a civilization learning faster than anyone predicted, adapting to alien warfare as though it had been preparing for centuries. They saw a species not driven by conquest, but by the unshakable conviction that injustice would not go unanswered. Then humanity uncovered something monumental. Deep within intercepted Dominion transmissions, analysts found fragmented coordinates pointing to the Empire's hidden strategic AI hub, the neural core that guided everything from fleet logistics to planetary defenses. Dominion leaders believed its secrecy made it invincible. Humanity saw it as the key to ending the war entirely. The decision to strike that heart was made instantly. Every human commander understood the importance. Every engineer recognized the risk. And every soldier knew the mission could reshape the galaxy. Humanity didn't hesitate. They prepared not with reckless confidence, but with precise determination. They had found the place where the Dominion believed itself untouchable. Now they intended to prove it wrong. Operation Starfall began with a maneuver no Dominion strategists believed possible. Human navigators calculated a gravitational slingshot route that used 3 unstable pulsar corridors to bypass nearly all Dominion border defenses. Any miscalculation would have torn the fleet apart, but humanity had reached a point where impossible no longer carried weight. Entire strike groups threaded through distorted spacetime with a precision that left even their own allies speechless. When the Dominion finally detected them, the humans were already deep inside Imperial space, closer to the strategic AI citadel than any enemy had ever approached. The citadel itself wasn't a fortress in the traditional sense. It was a planet-sized superstructure of interlinked processing towers, shield generators, and command nodes buried beneath layers of automated defenses. Dominion leaders believed that no physical force could reach it, and that no digital system could infiltrate it. But humans didn't try to overpower it, they targeted its blind spots. Their fleet dispersed into dozens of strike elements, each performing a task designed to overload a specific portion of the Citadel's defenses. Drones flooded the outer regions, creating thousands of false positive threats. Electromagnetic bursts scrambled automated targeting. Human cruisers deployed decoy signals mimicking entire fleets. The Citadel's AI began diverting resources to chase illusions, thinning its defensive coverage without realizing it. Human infiltration teams moved through those gaps. They weren't super soldiers or augmented experiments. They were engineers, marines, and specialists who had trained relentlessly for this moment. Their ships dropped them into gravity wells designed to crush intruders, but human exosuits compensated with brute force. They advanced through corridors built for Dominion physiology, adapting on the fly. Where automated plasma turrets activated, humans reprogrammed them mid-fire through improvised overrides. Where doors sealed shut, they rewired power conduits to short-circuit the locks. Every step forward came at a cost, but they tolerated those losses with unflinching resolve. One infiltration squad reached the convergence chamber housing the Citadel's data core, a city of humming towers linked by bridges suspended over fields of crackling energy. Dominion elites believed no organic mind could navigate the security lattice without being overwhelmed. Human analysts had studied it anyway, finding patterns in the chaos. They built a virus not meant to destroy, but to rewrite. It adapted to each defense layer, mimicking Dominion protocols as it climbed through firewalls. The infiltration team connected the delivery node manually, knowing that once the virus initiated, every Dominion system would react violently. They deployed it anyway. Across the Dominion, the effect was immediate and catastrophic. Fleet formations drifted out of alignment as their command links updated with contradictory orders. Weapons systems shut down, rebooted, then targeted irrelevant sectors. Planetary shields flickered. Surveillance grids collapsed. The strategic AI, unable to reconcile the conflicting directives inserted by the Terran virus, began prioritizing emergency shutdowns across its own infrastructure. What the Dominion had depended on for centuries, their centralization, became the mechanism of their downfall. Human fleets attacked at that exact moment. Not with wanton destruction, but with surgical precision. Disabled warships were boarded instead of obliterated. Surrender signals were honored. The Dominion's military, leaderless and confused, fractured within hours. Entire battalions laid down their arms rather than face an enemy that had dismantled the foundation of their empire without resorting to planetary devastation. Inside the Dominion's ruling chamber, panic spread faster than any weapon. Their centuries of dominance evaporated the moment humanity demonstrated that determination combined with adaptability could overcome even the most entrenched power. When the Dominion finally signaled surrender, humanity accepted it without humiliation or cruelty. They demanded the release of enslaved species, the dismantling of oppressive systems, and reparations for the attacks that started the conflict. They didn't demand territory. They didn't demand tribute. They demanded justice. The freed species witnessed something unprecedented. The humans who had fought with unstoppable intensity now extended mercy to their defeated enemy. They rebuilt ruined infrastructure. They sent medical aid to Dominion civilians. They offered diplomatic frameworks instead of dominance. For the first time in generations, the galaxy saw a victor uninterested in empire. But they also saw the truth: humanity was peaceful by choice, not by limitation. The Threx had dragged humans into a war they never sought. They had mistaken silence for fear, patience for frailty, and compassion for weakness. Only after the smoke cleared did they understand the magnitude of their mistake. Humanity didn't win because they were stronger. They won because they refused to surrender their future, and because once provoked, they fought with a clarity and unity no empire could match. The galaxy would remember this war not as the rise of a new conqueror, but as the moment the universe learned that humans, when pushed too far, become the force that ends oppression rather than spreading it. The Dominion wanted obedience. What they awakened instead was humanity's resolve.